Hi Internet, my name is Jane Elizabeth Manley and I love books. I love the way they look on my shelf. I love the way that they smell. And I love the way that they feel. Kind of like a simultaneous visual and kinesthetic learning that I can't really get from like PDFs and ebooks and stuff on a screen. But more than these physical attributes is a unique 200+ page combination of letters that really makes books for me. It's books that drew me to become a writer. The biggest undertaking that I've been working on lately is a multi-genre project that also happens to be the pinnacle of my capstone class here at EMU. Kind of a big deal. At the culmination of my undergraduate career, I've decided to explore, through literature, two topics that mean a lot to me personally: LGBTQIA issues and Christian spirituality. Let me just say that I think this is a really big deal because no one really ever talks about it. That is, aside from bad-mouthing the opposing side. Use of scare quotes because of the us versus them mentality. A big piece of evidence for the lack of this neutral, let alone positive, interaction is the fact that these two books were extremely hard to find. And also, I couldn't find any others. At all. So today I'm going to be dramatizing a sort of conversation debate between the two narrators of these two books, based on my own personal interpretation. There's Rami from Melody Carlson's Bright Purple, Color Me Confused, and Jeanette from Jeanette Winterson's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. Alright, let's start the conversation. Who is God and what is a relationship with him like? God is someone that I pray to on a fairly regular basis, but mostly when I need his help or I think that other people need his help. I believe that God can do whatever he wants and save anyone from anything. For the bulk of my life, God is my most close and faithful friend. Pretty much everything I do in my life, for my mother, for my church, I do out of love for him and of fear of him. God is incredibly powerful. What does being a Christian mean? For me, being a Christian means I go to youth group on Saturday nights, I go to church on Sunday mornings, I don't socialize with unbelievers unless I'm forced to, and I stand very firm on what the Bible says. Though loving your enemies can be very hard sometimes. I am also a faithful churchgoer, but not just on the weekend. Basically, my whole life is the church. As a young woman, a teenager, I was preaching fantastic sermons in front of the whole congregation. While my church is more like a tight family, it's sometimes kind of like a clique. I don't feel like befriending non-believers is going against my belief in God, because either you're bringing them to God or you're just being a good neighbor. But I know a lot of people at my church don't agree with me and only talk to each other. Who is the biggest influence in your life? I feel like I have to say God. When I have to make a choice, I stick to what I think the Bible says, even if it upsets people. But my mom and I are really close too. Being an only child to a single mom can be really hard sometimes. But at the end of the day, we do love each other, and I know she has my best interest in heart, and I do respect her, mostly. I would also have to say my mother. She adopted me with the sole purpose of dedicating me to God and making me a missionary. Until I was old enough to feel like I could act on my own wishes for my life, I followed out the path that she had laid out for me. A lot of people think she's pretty eccentric and kind of weird, but she showed me how to be the best Christian I can be from a very young age, and I've always respected her for that. Interesting, but how are each of your mothers different than you? Oh, I love my mother, but there are some fundamental beliefs that are different between us. Mom is really liberal. She's a therapist. She's not a Christian. So she doesn't have a problem with things like premarital sex, product of which, example A, or people choosing to be gay, which has caused a lot of arguments between the two of us regarding my ex-best friend Jess, who comes out as a lesbian at the beginning of the book. I also get irritated when she won't let me buy a car, though I know money's tight. And I wish she were more active too. And I know that she loves me and I love her, but sometimes it's really not that hard to freeze her out sometimes. But she's certainly not the antagonist of my story. Wow, my mom is the opposite. On one page, I actually describe her as a spiritual whore, and by that I mean that she idolizes the church and the ministry work that it does above the person she's supposed to be doing it for. Growing up, I really didn't mind all the biblical drills, the intense prayer meetings, and the other rituals that we did. But as I grew up, I realized how close-minded she is. I was just her project, even before she adopted me. Even though she raised me to have a really super strong spirituality, mine was never as intense as hers. I'm also just a lot more open and friendly than my mother is. She tends to freeze people out that she doesn't think are holy enough. And she's definitely the antagonist of my book. Who is the target audience of your novel? Teenage Christian girls. There are also questions in the back of the book, so that you can use it as a discussion starter for youth groups and stuff. My audience is adults. It's more literature than just like an easy read, partially because it doesn't really have a linear timeline, and I'm specifically writing for people who are struggling between sexuality and religion, whether for themselves or just the belief system in general. What does God say about lesbian, gay, and bisexual orientations? The Bible, particularly in Leviticus, God condemns homosexuality as a sin, and I'm pretty sure that it's worse than others, because pushing my ex-best friend Jess out of my life throughout the first half of the book seems like the right thing to do, until I realized that while I shouldn't condone her, I should still love the sinner, hate the sin, until God can save her from being lesbian. I never felt like I had to be saved from something. The love I felt for Melanie and later for Katie felt like the most natural thing in the world and just sort of happened. As I say in the book, to the pure, all things are pure. I think I take this from a story in Acts when Peter sees the vision of God making all the unclean animals clean again. And also from Romans 14, where it talks about how people have different ideas of what purity is. And God sees them as the same, because they're both doing it out of love for Him. I also feel like God never betrayed me like other people did. I just feel kind of disconnected from being driven away from the church the way that I was. What do Christians say about same-sex attraction? Oh, we Christians say that it's a sin. And I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that it is a choice. If it's not a choice, it probably comes from something that happened to somebody when they were growing up, like being sexually abused. I realize now that we shouldn't reject these people because they need Jesus to fix them. That's what the Exodus website told me. There are so many testimonies on that website that talk about how people have been healed from homosexuality, and I want that for my friend Jess. Yeah, Christians are not comfortable with it. My church performed exorcisms on me, and once even started me out for 3 days in a dark, locked room in my house because they thought I had literal demons inside of me. I think they thought this perversion was actual demons because I was such a strong leader in the church, and I could do no wrong in their eyes. My mother was a different story, possibly because she had seen my defiant side as a child growing up. She thought I was literally, intentionally selling my soul to the devil, and so it wasn't long before the whole church would have nothing to do with me. Given when your books were published, do you think they're still applicable today? Mine came out about 10 years ago in 2006. Teenagers these days, the millennials and Generation Z, are becoming a lot more liberal. So it's still good for Christian teenagers to read my book and see how you can approach homosexuality in a firm and yet loving way. Mine was way back in 1985, so kind of a long time ago. But my book is literature more than anything. I think it's as meaningful as ever. Culture may be different, but there will always be overly religious people who ostracize their own just because they're different. My story is just one of many. Final question, would you read each other's book? I don't know. I am interested in the character of the mother, though she does sound kind of religiously extreme. But if Jeanette is really affirming of her lesbian relationships, I don't know if I want to be reading that book. I don't want to read a book where a woman is loving another woman when she should be looking for a man to complete her instead. I would like to say that I would try, but I honestly would probably just end up crying myself to sleep. Reading rejection of people as righteousness would just be too much for me. So yeah, 2 very different narrators from 2 very different books. I hope that this video interested you about these 2 books in a more of a personal, in a cultural way of seeing the debate that's going on between the Christian audience and the LGBT audience, and how actually that audience is kind of very often the same people, whether somebody is LGBTQIA or is an ally. It's very often that they also are Christian, and so this debate is really not such an us versus them. If you are extremely liberal, you might not want to read the purple book. If you are extremely conservative, you might not want to read the orange books, because these, while they're coming from a very similar place and going over the same kinds of issues, they approach it in very different ways and come to very different conclusions. These books are very different, but I think that they shed really great light on what different people feel about the same issue at hand. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to know more about Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit or Bright Purple Color Me Confused, I will be putting links in the blog. Have a great day and happy reading!